Oh, hey Tyler, what's up?
Oh, nothing much, Evan. Just, getting some high potions and some elixirs ready for our Final Fantasy discussion.
Uh, we're talking about Final Fantasy, the movie.
Oh, no.
We found it. We're closing in on the life form.
Let's move out, people. They came to unlock a mystery. I don't see how any living thing could survive out here. They came to uncover an ancient truth.
This is it. Dr. Ross has opened the door for us.
I say we go in.
What they did
What the hell is that?
was unleash a force unlike the universe has ever known.
So, Evan, what were your thoughts on The Spirits Within?
It was very hard to stay awake, which kind of reminds me of every other time I've tried to watch this movie. I think it's a movie that it's impressive how a movie with this big a budget that I think pushed like CG animation so far and had so many big names could be so unremarkable. Like, there's things at the beginning that I was like, oh yeah, this movie's cooler than I remember. I mean, there's some cool little gadgets and Old New York.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Barrier City, and there's some cool stuff right at the beginning. But man, like after that, it just there's like no connection with any character. I mean, the main Aki Ross, she's like the only one that's even close to interesting, and even then, I don't feel like they do anything to build upon that. You're just like, yep, here's your main character. Hope you like her, but.
Yeah, I think the most interesting part of the movie for sure was the opening. I really appreciated how they kind of just dropped you into the world, and they didn't have any like exposition that beat you over the head. This is the year 2065, mankind. It's not. They just let you experience the. It was a bleak world. Everything was basically destroyed. And you got to see the. Dilapidated New York City, old New York City. And I was getting some cool, like, Big O from, like, the anime, like, those vibes where it's just a dilapidated city, and then there's these barrier cities that humanity is living in. I was like, oh, this is, a cool take on, this world building. But I would agree with that. It kind of slipped into a
Coma.
It was just kind of mundane storytelling, and it really was like melodramatic at points.
The dream is always the same.
You okay?
Yeah, you could tell they were trying. I mean, I don't know if it was just the voice directing, if there was just something that didn't. It's such a weird movie to talk about because it's not a movie that's like so bad you can make fun of it. It's just not that interesting, and it's very difficult to pinpoint what part of it where there's a big disconnect. I think it's just like everything doesn't quite line up. Right? I mean, you've got some big voice actors that are like instantly recognizable, so it's not like they did an awful job or anything, but I'm not sure. It probably boils down to the writing. I just feel like there's not like a single line in the movie that like resonated or anything. I mean, my favorite lines are probably the first and the last line. The first one is just like the same dream, again or something like that, which is like, I feel like I've heard that at the beginning of like 10 animes. And then the last line I think is Sid saying, "It's warm," which is great. Which I was like, that's okay. That's how you're gonna end it. But it's
that's the final line we're gonna go out on.
Yeah, it's. I don't know. Like you said, the best part of the movie is the beginning where they're not really hitting you over the head with exposition. But then, like midway through the movie, they are. But the exposition doesn't like mean anything. Like it for a sci-fi movie, I feel like you have to go in like one of two directions. and I feel like they tried to go with explaining everything, but the things they were trying to explain made less sense by explaining them. Like, oh, they're ghost aliens. Okay, you're gonna go on to why they would exist as ghosts, maybe?
Spirits? I thought we weren't supposed to use the S word.
Don't get smart with me.
Nope, just accept that. We're moving on. It's like, well, I'm not quite caught up yet on this. I'm not on board. Like, it's so hard with a movie like this where already the suspension of disbelief in the uncanny valley is just at like the highest levels of any movie ever, and then piling on top of that a story that is not willing to kind of walk the tightrope of either being vague enough that I can kind of make up my own reasons and make it make sense, or being kind of straightforward enough that I can accept it as like nuts and bolt reality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that does make perfect sense. I think that uncanny valley effect, I was experiencing it more so not with Aki, but with the other cast members, especially Alec Baldwin's character. There was times where I was just like, this just looks like a really bad PS3 model. Like,
I was thinking that the whole time. I'm like, this is like a good-looking PS3 game at the best of times. But yeah, I was like, oh, they tried to get Ben Affleck's character model, and they only got Alec Baldwin to do the voice. But yeah, you could definitely tell. I think it's kind of like you were talking about the dilapidated structures, having just played Last of Us 2 to date this future video. It reminded me a little bit of that, but also talking about the character models, you know, you can definitely tell like the ones that are going to be in the most cutscenes get the most, you know, work. And she was kind of the poster child of this, you know, this movie. She's the most important character, and they kind of built her up. So you can definitely tell they put more care and resources into her facial animations. She's the only one who at times I was like, okay, I can kind of believe this. But there was that scene where some of the Marines, I think it was when Steve Buscemi's character gets killed, and then the other, I think the one female soldier, what was her name? She reminded me of Abby a little bit from Last of Us 2, but I know her name. I know her name was different, because I was like, is that the same name? It's not. But when she was like sad about him dying and going out in like her, you know, gun-filled rage outro, she the character model did not sell any of the emotion like at all. So that was like a huge like, okay, I'm so not invested.
yeah, there's times where I was just like, it was kind of a slog trying to get through some of the scenes, especially towards the end of the movie, where I was just like, I know where this is going, let's wrap it up. You know, the antagonist, the general, was like such a caricature of a villain that I was just completely pulled out of the movie at that point, because, you know, up until that point, I really didn't have too many problems with the movie, like in the first act, and it got a little dicey in the second act, but I just, at the end, it pulled me completely out, because of, he was just, there was hardly any motivation for him to do the irrational things he was doing. I would understand if he was like one of those, you know, villains that you could understand where they're coming from and they're doing these actions because they think it's the right thing to do. But he was just making, you know, nonsensical choices that were putting everyone in jeopardy.
System overload.
I know.
Warning. System overload.
I know!
Warning. System
I know!
overload. Warning. System overload.
But it must be done.
Warning.
See, they tried to give him a little bit of an out, because they show that one picture of his family, and he talks about that for like 1 second, where his family got killed in, what was it, like California or something, or one of the bases.
My wife and daughter were killed by phantoms when the San Francisco barrier city was attacked. Did I ever tell you that? try to imagine what that must have been like, seeing everyone around you fall over dead for no apparent reason.
But yeah, he was just so over the top, and I love the fact that he was voiced literally by Hades' James Woods.
Oh, that's where I was wondering whether because I rewatched Hercules not too long ago, and I was like, I can pinpoint this voice, but I can't put a face to the voice, you know?
James Woods is, like, as a human being, is also a horrible person. But it was really just comically over the top. Like, he was making good points too, like his arguments on paper, but the way they like made him all dressed in black and just obviously evil, and just
the slick back hair.
Just like, okay, I will give them credit. It's one of the few character designs that actually does stand out. Like the rest of everybody, like especially like I get maybe they were trying to go for some sort of realism at the beginning, but the military people with the deep eyes, when they were coming in, it's just like everybody's wearing the exact same uniform. They don't stand out at all. I mean, they do eventually reveal themselves, and then later get fit in a different set of deep eyes uniforms where you can see part of their faces. So I don't understand if they were using that as like an actual...
They looked a little more intimidating because those updated masks look more like skulls.
Yeah, they looked weird. I mean, it was like very not sci-fi. It was more like Mad Max kind of stuff.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like the weird way it fit over their heads. Yeah, kind of like the skulls.
But yeah, like how you're saying with the designs of all the characters, I feel like, and obviously this is apparent because it was made by, the now defunct Square Pictures, but it feels like a movie that was made by a video game studio because of just how cookie cutter the plot was. The plot felt like a video game. There's a sub quest we have to do. We have to collect all these, spirits. You had the, parallels between the other series of like, there's a Gaia, there's a live stream. Yeah, there's Sid. It just felt like some of the design choices where it was like, I feel like the characters just felt very bland. They just felt like NPCs where they didn't have interesting designs. They didn't have anything that made people stand out except for, Aki and the general. I would say that was really it. Even, the Deep Eyes team, they were just completely generic. Alec Baldwin's character was just like a white male,
The one thing I will praise the movie is having a woman who voices Aki.
Oh yeah, Ming-Na.
So I mean, like having her as like literally the protagonist, that's pretty cool. That's pretty progressive.
Yeah, I think right before this she did Mulan.
Father, I brought you the sword of Shan Yu and the crest of the Emperor. They're gifts to honor the Fa family.
The greatest gift and honor is having you for a daughter.
And she was great, I thought her performance was good.
She's definitely the one thing in this movie that kind of, not that she actually manages to hold it together, because I don't think anyone could, but she definitely was the strongest point of the movie. I mean, the one other thing I will say is the way it looks. I mean, for the time, I got the Blu-ray of this, and it's still, like, watchable. I mean, there's lots of things from this time that are just... I mean, this definitely pushed it forward in terms of computer animation, but aside from that, the funniest thing, and one thing I want to do more research on is, so I bought the Blu-ray, and on the back it says, Roger Ebert review, like, 2 thumbs way up. I'm like, oh god, like... Really? I'd love to read the review and see how anyone came to that conclusion.
Some of his reviews I take with a grain of salt.
I don't really agree with him that much, but still, like... Because as you know, he gave Blue Velvet a very negative review, so he's kind of out on my book.
Yeah, who could give Blue Velvet a negative review?
Exactly.
Come on.
Mommy. Oh, Mommy! 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 Mommy loves you. Baby wants to fuck.
Exactly. And he said video games aren't art. You know, get that bitch out of here. So. And he likes this movie. This doesn't make any sense. I mean, one or the. I mean, both or neither, right? Well.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a movie, and it doesn't feel like a video game. So you kind of get this, hodgepodge, slapped together thing that just feels, alienated.
Yeah, it has a. You say alienated. I mean, it's especially like the opening and seeing the weird designs of the ghost alien people. It's a movie that. There's like nothing I can compare it to. The closest thing, I had it pointed out to me, some podcasts, they were talking about how the Mass Effect team of the first game at least drew a lot of inspiration, were like obsessed with this movie. And you can see a lot of parallels with their cutscenes in this movie. And like even the uniform that she wears, the USMF, like that uniform looks like straight Mass Effect. But... And I like to believe that USMF stands for United States motherfucker, but there's no real way to know.
We gotta call up Mr. Sakaguchi and be like, hey, give us a scoop.
I've got the art book. Maybe it says in the art book. And there's two different commentaries I get to listen to eventually, but none of them have Sakaguchi. It's like the co-director, which I'm assuming the co-director was the actual director of this, and they just stamped Sakaguchi's name on it because he's like the big guy at the company. It said that he came up with the story, but there was like two other English writers.
Story.
Yeah, so again, how involved was he in this? But I think what I wanted to say at the beginning, but I forgot, is the reason this movie failed is if you look at the Square Pictures logo, it's a fucking rectangle.
They failed in the first couple seconds.
I mean, doesn't take a fucking genius. Goddamn, but. What I think is interesting about the movie is the things that kind of tie it to the other ones, even barely. Like you said, Gaia and the live stream, like it seems almost blatant how similar it is to 7 and 10 with Gaia and Spira, and how 7 and 10 are supposedly like 1,000 years apart. I wonder where in that timeline this takes place. But
this one hits 2065 years.
Yeah, but it's just. Yeah, for me, I remember when I first saw this movie, definitely feeling like there wasn't enough to connect to from the Final Fantasy universe. That that's one of the reasons I remember not liking it before. But I think if it had stood on its own merits, it wouldn't really have mattered. But I think it should have gone for one or the other better. Well, I mean, I think it was trying to go for being a good movie. It just,
I think if they would have rebranded it, and it wasn't a Final Fantasy movie, I think it would have done okay.
I think it would definitely done better.
Yeah, but I think attaching, that brand to it really, I think it did more of a disservice than it did, trying to propel it, because probably for the, studio and, for Sony and Columbia Pictures and, Square, they probably wanted to, market this as like, this is going to be a Final Fantasy story, but on the big screen. It just didn't feel like that, though. It felt like something totally different, but just with things that felt peppered in that didn't feel like enough of.
Yeah, the thing I always appreciate about Final Fantasy, and why, even though in the last decade obviously they haven't nailed it out of the park by any means, is just their willingness to kind of go for it. And I feel like they went for it with this movie in terms of how it looks and the technology, but story-wise, I don't feel like they went for it at all. I mean, the story had like a few interesting wrinkles to it, but just in terms of the storytelling, like if you take the story, and obviously it has to be way more compressed because it's an hour and 45 minutes as opposed to a 30-hour game, but still, it didn't feel like it had that Square ambition to tell a new story or something that was like breaking the mold. But maybe if they had gotten chances to, maybe they were even thinking this was going to have sequels or something, I don't know, but it did not.
I think they were ambitious, for sure. They were definitely ambitious, but I think they got very lazy in development.
Yeah, I think they just this was at the point where it felt like Square could do nothing wrong. Like they just were creating so many games and hit after hit, and even their little stumbles, didn't quite do anything negative to their reputation. But with this movie, I mean, famously, they had to close the studio. It almost bankrupted them.
Yeah.
It was a good learning experience for them. I mean, they
Yeah,
made the
basically-
same mistakes a decade later with 13, and there's a whole unfortunate cycle of 12 being delayed, taking up a bunch of resources, 13 being delayed and too much over budget, and them having to try to use the assets for 2 more games, and then the Versus 13 being turned into 15, and then 14 failing and getting rebranded. I mean, they learn from their mistakes for a couple years, but they can still get overconfident. It's kind of like Nintendo to a degree with the Virtual Boy and Wii U, where they hit it out of the park, and then the pendulum swings the other way, but they just don't realize it till it's too late. But
And I think this was Sakaguchi's swan song. He more or less, kind of slipped back and just to a producer and an executive producer role after this, because I imagine Square was just like, you know what, I think we're gonna, let some other people.
yeah, you helped us out quite a bit, but.
Hey, I'm here to tell somebody named Sakaguchi that their movie bombed and they're fired. Yeah, so if that's you, get the f*** out. Yeah, thanks.
I mean, I'd have to do some research, but I'm trying to remember when he went to Mistwalker and made like Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey and stuff, and I was looking
I feel
like
that
a
was
couple.
in the mid 2000s.
That was the mid
That was
2000s, but I'm
yeah.
trying to think of I don't think he had he didn't
2006
have any
maybe.
involvement in 12 because that would have been Yasumi Matsuno. I doubt he had much involvement with 11. I want to say he was executive producer on 10, but I could be pulling that out of my ass. But
Yeah.
I feel like he didn't have a strong directing role. I mean, he didn't even direct 7. He was, I think, executive producer. I think Katase was the one who did 7. But it's just a little sad to see that's the way he kind of went out. And this is not a discussion for this exactly, but Lost Odyssey is like one of my least favorite games.
Oh, yeah.
It's got a lot of good ideas in it again, but it just didn't quite click for me. But it's sad because I was looking up, I was like, what, is he doing anything? And he's been working on some mobile stuff, and it's just to think that's, he went from having the most ambitious ideas and the biggest games and being kind of the most important guy in that field to now it's just, what's he doing? What's his legacy gonna be?
Yeah. Well, I mean, his legacy is still intact, but they're, from his early career. But yeah, now that he is in the twilight of his career, yeah, it's kind of sad to see that,
I think what we're both trying to say is, when is Final Fantasy Spirits Within 2 coming out?
That's what I really want to see. I want to see a reboot, remake, sequel, prequel.
If we can get we're going to watch Final Fantasy Unlimited not too long after this, but hopefully they can merge those together and kind of give it what the fans really want.
what they're chomping at the bit for.
Unlimited Spirits Within.
Overall, would you recommend this movie for anyone in 2020 or any time beyond to sit down and buy this movie or watch this movie on their own time? Would you recommend this?
Only for the most curious, diehard Final Fantasy fans, which I feel like I'm in that boat and I still didn't enjoy it. So take it at your own risk. It's it's interesting as something to examine, but not necessarily to watch.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there are a few things, like I said, I keep talking about the world building. I love good world building in any type of media, any type of fiction, literature, movies, TV shows. That's one of the first things I'd love to get attached to, but it just wasn't enough for this particular story. The characters fell through, the plot fell through. Yeah. But,
what I'm interested in is, do you think they would were ever planning or had any plans to make a video game with this world, or like tied in with
You know,
this
that would have
movie.
been really interesting,
'Cause
like a crossover. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like if this movie did really well, let's say it hit it out of the park and it was a little bit better, I think the world itself is, I mean, it's supposed to be Earth, right? I mean, it's New York City, old New York City. And I think the original plan for 7 was it's supposed to be set in New York City as well, and they eventually, after many drafts, changed that. But it would be interesting to see a more real-world Final Fantasy. Maybe that's why they set it in the real world, is they thought it would appeal to more people if it was. But
yeah,
it's just an interesting part in Square's legacy. I feel like they learned after this, again, a little bit more restraint. And that makes me a little sad, because I do miss the days in the PlayStation era where it was just like Square had like so many games and there's so many things, and now it's like we get one Square game every 5 years, and if it's good or not is, you know, not always reliable.
Yeah. Well,
I should say big Square game. I'm sure we're getting like Theater Rhythm 3 or something, but
can't wait for that.
Mark it on your diary.
What the hell is going on?
Something's not right. It shouldn't be happening. We're surrounded.
They're right behind us.
Captain, come on.
We've lost contact.
Oh my God.
Let's get the hell out of here.
Nothing you've seen, nothing you've experienced can prepare you.
Look out!
For where the next evolution in reality will take you.
All right, everybody, here they come.
Fire in the hole!
It is not a fairy tale. It is true.
Well, I think that's it for this episode.
Thank you for joining Tyler and I for this discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions on something that fits in this category, we're kind of trying to cover things from the past that are either forgotten or should be forgotten, and see if we can find anything in them worth talking about.
All right. Well, thank you guys. See you next time.
That could be our thing. We like kiss at the end.
A couple kisses.